He escaped the village only to bring disaster home. Nuru, a 52-year-old widow, stood at the edge of her small farm and watched the children running along the dusty path to the river. She had spent decades caring for her husband and children. She had tilled the land, fed the family, and tended to every need without complaint. Her life had been quiet, repetitive, and safe. Her own desires had been buried under responsibility and expectation. When her husband, Kato, had passed away suddenly the previous year, a strange emptiness had filled her heart. For the first time, she felt unshackled from duty and the oppressive weight of obligation. She looked at the distant horizon and wondered what life could be if she lived for herself. That was when he arrived. His name was Taban, a man from Kampala who had recently returned to the countryside after several years in the city. He was in his late 30s, handsome, and spoke with the smooth confidence of someone who had lived a life very different from the slow rhythm of village days. He came to her farm under the pretense of offering help with crops but stayed to talk for hours. Nuru had not felt such attention since her youth. His stories of the bustling city, the laughter in crowded streets, and the freedom of evenings without responsibility enchanted her. Taban's presence was intoxicating. He complimented her in ways no one had in years. He laughed at her jokes and listened to her thoughts with rapt attention. Nuru felt alive in a way she had forgotten was possible. Nights spent alone with memories of her husband now seemed dull and empty. She began to dream of walking beside Taban in the city, of tasting the life she had sacrificed for decades. Her children watched her smile more often and noticed a lightness in her step that had been missing for years. The village elders, however, whispered among themselves. They remembered Nuru as a woman of quiet dignity and feared that her longing for passion might lead to misfortune. Even her children expressed concern, though gently, unsure if their mother could navigate the complexities of the city at her age. Nuru dismissed their warnings. She told herself she deserved happiness and that her late years were meant for freedom. One evening, Taban arrived with a worn leather bag and a train ticket tucked inside. He promised a new life, a chance to leave the past behind, and Nuru felt a thrill of adventure in her chest. She packed her belongings that night and left a note for her children explaining she needed to find herself. No one in the village slept well that night, as rumors spread quickly. Some said she was reckless, others said she was brave. Nuru herself felt both fear and exhilaration as the dusty village path led her to a waiting bus. The city was nothing like she imagined. Bright lights, endless noise, and the smell of exhaust and fried food filled the air. For the first few days, Nuru felt alive. She bought new clothes, tasted unfamiliar fruits, and walked along streets crowded with strangers who paid her no mind. Taban was charming, taking her to small cafes and teaching her to navigate the subway. She laughed more than she had in years and allowed herself to feel young again. But soon the city revealed its harsh truths. Money was tight. Taban's promises of work and steady income were lies. He often disappeared for hours and returned with excuses. Nuru felt the sting of betrayal but could not admit defeat. Pride and hope kept her walking through streets that suddenly seemed menacing. Nights were lonely and cold despite the city lights. Every time she tried to call her children, the words caught in her throat. She wondered if she had been foolish to think happiness could be bought or chased at this stage of life. A week into her new life, Nuru discovered that Taban had been using her for money. He sold some of the small jewelry she had brought from the village and borrowed money under her name. When confronted, he smiled and promised to make things right, but never did. Nuru, who had once been a respected and resourceful woman in her village, now felt powerless and betrayed. The excitement that had drawn her away from Kienjo had turned into a harsh reality she could not ignore. She wandered the city streets, feeling every step heavier than the last. For the first time in decades, she truly missed the simplicity of home. She missed the smell of wet earth after rain, the sound of her children laughing in the fields, and even the quiet routines that she had once found suffocating. The freedom she had chased had brought her no joy, only the sharp sting of regret. Late one night, Taban disappeared entirely, leaving behind only a small note that read he had found a new opportunity. Nuru felt a cold emptiness that shook her to the bone. She realized that the life she had thought would be her liberation had become her prison. She had escaped her village only to be deceived and left alone in a world that did not care for her. She cried openly in the shadows of the city and felt the weight of every decision that had led her here. The next morning, as she sat on a bench in the park with no destination, a woman selling bananas walked by and asked if she was okay. Nuru looked at her reflection in the window of a nearby shop and saw the fear and exhaustion in her own eyes. She thought of her children, her farm, and the life she had left behind. For the first time, she truly understood the value of what she had abandoned. She made a decision in that quiet moment to return to the village. Though she did not yet know how she would face her children and neighbors, she only knew that she could not stay in the city any longer. As the bus rumbled down the highway toward Kianzhou, Nuru stared out the window and saw the landscape of her home approaching. Fields stretched wide under the sun. Smoke rose from distant kitchens. Children ran along paths that seemed smaller and simpler than she remembered. She felt both fear and hope. Would her family forgive her? Would the village elders see her as foolish or courageous? She clenched her hands in her lap and whispered a prayer to the ancestors, asking for strength and guidance. As the bus slowed near the edge of the village, she could see familiar faces pausing to watch the approaching vehicle. Some recognized her and whispered urgently. Others shook their heads and muttered words of caution. Her heart raced. She stepped off the bus and into the dusty street she had left months ago. The smell of the earth filled her senses, and a sense of familiarity comforted her. Yet she sensed something different in the air. Rumors had spread of her adventure in the city, and the villagers were not waiting to welcome her with open arms. Nuru walked slowly toward her home, each step heavier than the last. She knew she could not run from the consequences of her choices. She entered the compound and saw her children sitting under the mango tree, eyes wide with a mixture of relief and anger. She opened her mouth to speak when a neighbor appeared from behind the fence with a grim look. They whispered urgently to her son. Nuru felt a cold dread settle in her chest. Something terrible had happened while she was away. Nuru felt her knees weaken as her eldest son, Kisembo, ran toward her with tears in his eyes. She tried to call his name, but her voice seemed to vanish in the dusty air. The neighbors whispered urgently, their eyes wide with fear and judgment. Her youngest, little Akiing, clung to Kisembo's leg, trembling. Something terrible had happened in her absence, and the weight of it pressed on her chest. "Mother," Kisembo said, his voice breaking, "the farm, the crops, they are gone. The animals, everything." He could not finish. Nuru blinked rapidly, trying to understand. She had left the village for a few months thinking of adventure and love, leaving her responsibilities in the hands of her children. She had not imagined that misfortune would strike with such intensity. The neighbor who had brought the news, a tall man named Juma, stepped closer. "Nuru, it is worse than you think. There was a fire. It started near the granary. We tried to save what we could, but most of it burned." His voice trembled as he spoke. Nuru's heart pounded. She had escaped the safety of home seeking freedom, and now the home she had loved was in ruin. She felt guilt twist inside her like a knife. The children led her to the remnants of the farm. Charred straw and burnt earth smoldered under the sun. The banana trees were blackened and broken. The chickens that had pecked in the morning light were gone. Even the small well that had been a gathering place for water was half collapsed from the fire. Nuru's eyes filled with tears as she realized that her absence had left a hole through which disaster had entered her family's life. She remembered Taban, the man she had followed to the city. She remembered the promises and the laughter. Now it felt like a cruel joke. The fire, the loss, the shame in the eyes of the villagers, all of it seemed connected to her choice to abandon the only life she had ever known. She sank to the scorched earth, trembling, and whispered a prayer to her ancestors. She asked for forgiveness and guidance. Days passed. Nuru stayed at the village, trying to rebuild what she could. She mended fences with her hands blistered by labor, cleared the burnt soil, and comforted her children. Her neighbors watched her quietly, some with suspicion, some with sympathy. She felt the weight of their gazes. In the evenings, they gathered near the fire, speaking softly of responsibility, of choices, and of consequences. Nuru listened, sometimes arguing, sometimes silent, learning a lesson she had refused to accept in the city. But the consequences of her absence were not limited to the farm. Rumors spread through the village like wildfire. Some said she had gone to the city for forbidden love. Others whispered that she had been deceived by a younger man. Even distant relatives began to speak ill of her. Nuru felt their judgment keenly. She had once been respected for her hard work and wisdom. Now she felt exposed and vulnerable. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the city. It was from Taban. She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. His words were smooth and casual. He claimed the fire at the farm was a coincidence, that he had never intended harm, and that he missed her. Nuru stared at the page. She felt fury rise in her chest, and then a sharp pang of sadness. The man who had promised her freedom had only brought disaster. She crumpled the letter and threw it into the fire. The village elders called her to a meeting under the large fig tree at the center of Kianzhou. She sat quietly as they spoke. They did not scold her, not in words, but their presence was heavy with expectation. They reminded her of the strength she had always shown. They reminded her that her life was not defined by the mistakes she made, but by the courage she showed in facing them. Nuru listened, feeling a quiet strength grow inside her. The elders' wisdom grounded her, yet the damage could not be undone quickly. The crops would take months to grow again. The livestock would need to be replaced. Neighbors continued to murmur about her time away. Even her children struggled with mixed feelings of relief and resentment. Nuru realized that freedom could never be sought without responsibility. The adventure she had chased in the city had come at the cost of her family's stability. She vowed to repair what had been lost and to regain the trust she had shaken. But rebuilding was not easy. Every day brought new challenges. The weather was unpredictable. The soil had lost some of its fertility. Her children struggled with chores they had only recently begun to understand. Nuru felt exhausted, yet she pushed forward. In her quiet moments, she reflected on her time in the city. The excitement, the laughter, the moments of feeling alive, all of it had been fleeting. What remained now was the hard work of mending the life she had left behind. One evening, as she repaired a section of the fence near the burned granary, she saw smoke rising from the edge of the village. Her heart stopped. Memories of the first fire surged into her mind. She ran toward it, fearing the worst, her hands trembling. By the time she reached the spot, she saw it was a small fire started by children playing near dry grass. Relief washed over her, but a seed of fear had been planted. The villagers watched silently as Nuru extinguished the flames. They whispered among themselves, acknowledging her determination. That night, as she lay on the hard floor of her home, Nuru understood something profound. Freedom without caution could bring devastation. Desire without wisdom could lead to ruin. And yet, even after betrayal and loss, life continued to offer chances to rebuild, to grow, to find dignity again. She resolved to teach her children resilience, patience, and the value of measured decisions. Her own mistakes had become a lesson for the next generation. The next morning brought more news. A distant relative arrived from another village. He had heard about Nuru's adventure and the fire. He carried a letter, more formal this time, demanding that the property of the farm be shared or claimed by others who felt she had abandoned it. The village fell to hush as Nuru read the letter. This was more than a rumor now. It was a real threat to everything she had worked for. Her hands shook, but her eyes hardened. She would not let the mistakes of a few months erase decades of care, sacrifice, and labor. As Nuru stood in the middle of her farm, feeling the weight of all that had happened, she realized that the true journey had only begun. Returning home had brought her face to face with consequences she had not anticipated. The city had given her a taste of passion, but the village demanded responsibility. And now, both her children and the villagers watched closely, wondering if she could rise from the ashes of her choices and reclaim the respect she had once commanded. That night, Nuru heard a knock on her door. It was late and the village was quiet. She opened the door cautiously, expecting a neighbor or a relative. Instead, she found a figure in the shadows. A man she had never seen before, wearing a dark coat despite the warm night, spoke in a low voice. He claimed to have news of Taban and the city. Nuru felt a chill run down her spine. She realized that the story she thought she had left behind might not be finished yet. Nuru stared at the figure standing in the shadow of her doorway. His eyes were sharp and his voice low. "I have come with news of Taban," he said. Her heart raced. She had hoped never to hear that name again. Her hands shook as she gestured for him to enter. He stepped inside, bringing with him the heavy scent of smoke and dust. He revealed that Taban had been arrested in Kampala for swindling several women in villages across Uganda. The city police had been investigating him for months. The man spoke of contracts broken, money stolen, and the ruin left behind wherever Taban had gone. Nuru felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief because she would no longer be deceived. Horror because she realized she had narrowly escaped further disaster. She had unknowingly been part of a larger pattern of destruction. That night, Nuru sat outside her home, gazing at the stars above Kianjo. She remembered the adventures she had shared with Taban in the city, the moments of laughter, and the illusion of youth he had offered. Those memories now felt distant, almost like a dream she had barely lived. She realized that what she had thought was freedom had been a trap masked in charm. The village, the farm, and her children, these were the true constants of her life. They had been waiting for her all along, even when she did not understand their value. In the following days, Nuru's focus shifted entirely to restoration. She organized her children to clear the burned fields, planting seeds that had been saved in hidden sacks. She bartered with neighbors to borrow livestock and small tools to repair fences and shelters. Each day was filled with labor, yet each evening brought the quiet satisfaction of progress. She began to understand that true strength was not found in fleeting excitement, but in patience, resilience, and the love that bound her family together. Yet, the villagers remained cautious. Many still whispered about her escapade. Some avoided her entirely, fearing the influence of her choices. Others came to offer help but spoke with careful words, as if testing whether she had learned from the mistakes of her absence. Nuru understood their concern. She knew that rebuilding trust would take more than labor. It would require humility, honesty, and time. One afternoon, while working in the fields, Nuru noticed a small group of children approaching. Among them was a young girl who had always been shy and timid. She carried a clay pot filled with water and offered it to Nuru. "I wanted to help," the girl said softly. Nuru smiled, realizing that even in the midst of judgment and hardship, there were gestures of kindness and hope. The village, she understood, had not abandoned her entirely. It was she who had left, and now it was her responsibility to return fully, with patience and courage. Her children began to notice a change as well. Kasembo, who had been bitter at her absence, started helping more actively in the farm and speaking to her with less anger. Little Aking followed her everywhere, learning to plant seeds and mend fences. Slowly, the family began to heal together. Nuru felt pride, not in the adventure she had chased in the city, but in the work she and her children did to reclaim what had been lost. Just as the village started to find its rhythm again, another unexpected challenge emerged. Taban's trail in Kampala had left behind legal complications. Women he had deceived were now coming to claim debts and possessions in villages near Kianjo. Letters and visits arrived from authorities and distressed relatives. Nuru found herself once again at the center of turmoil, facing questions she could not easily answer. Her children looked to her for guidance, and neighbors waited silently to see if she could navigate this new crisis with dignity. One evening, as Nuru prepared dinner over a small fire outside her home, a man arrived riding a bicycle from the main road. He carried a letter sealed with an official stamp. Nuru's hands trembled as she broke the seal. The letter demanded repayment for debts she had never knowingly incurred. Taban's actions had reached beyond the city, and now the village was being held responsible. Panic and frustration threatened to overwhelm her, but she drew a deep breath and reminded herself of the lessons she had learned. Fear could not control her. She had faced betrayal before, and she could do it again. She gathered her children and explained the situation calmly. Together, they worked to sort out the debts, negotiating with the claimants and explaining their own lack of responsibility. Nuru's clear thinking and honesty impressed even the skeptics among the villagers. Slowly, the tension began to ease. Nuru realized that while mistakes could bring disaster, courage and wisdom could restore balance. She had escaped once and been deceived, but she had returned with clarity and determination. Despite the ongoing challenges, there were moments of quiet joy. Nuru and her children celebrated the first green shoots in the burned fields. Neighbors began to offer small gifts of food and tools, acknowledging her resilience. The elders shared stories of women in the village who had faced hardships and rebuilt their lives stronger than before. Nuru felt a deep connection to the history and strength of her community. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Nuru sat under the mango tree and watched her children play. She remembered the city, the charm of Taban, and the mistakes she had made, but she also remembered the enduring strength of her family and the unyielding spirit of her village. She understood now that true fulfillment came not from fleeting passions but from love, responsibility, and the courage to face consequences. Just as the evening settled into quiet, a messenger arrived from the distant village council. His expression was grave. He spoke of a meeting that required Nuru's presence. There were matters regarding land and inheritance that had been complicated by her absence. Nuru felt a wave of apprehension. She had survived betrayal, fire, and judgment. Now she would have to face the council and defend the life she had fought so hard to restore. She rose slowly, feeling both fear and determination. She knew the council would test her patience, her wisdom, and her resilience. The journey of reclaiming her life was not yet complete. She held her children close, whispering words of encouragement and love. They would face this challenge together. As Nuru walked toward the council meeting the next morning, a figure appeared at the edge of the road. It was a woman from the city, a friend of Taban's, carrying letters and documents. She claimed to have information that could change everything about the debts and accusations. Nuru felt a chill. The shadow of the city, the man who had brought disaster into her life, had followed her home. She realized that confronting her past would be unavoidable and that the final test of her courage was approaching. Nuru approached the village council grounds with her heart pounding. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the mud walls of the meeting hall. Her children stayed close behind, their eyes wide with worry and anticipation. The elders sat in a circle, their faces stern and unreadable. The villagers gathered quietly, murmuring among themselves. Nuru knew that today she would face both judgment and the opportunity for redemption. The woman from the city stepped forward and laid out letters, receipts, and documents. She explained that Taban's manipulations had been far-reaching and that many of the claims against Nuru's family were fabricated or falsely attributed. The council listened intently as Nuru watched their expressions change slowly from suspicion to cautious understanding. The tension in the air was heavy. Nuru could feel the weight of every decision she had made, the months spent chasing illusion, and the consequences she had endured. When it was Nuru's turn to speak, she took a deep breath and told her story. She spoke of her life in the village, the years of sacrifice, the loss of her husband, and the temptation of freedom and excitement in the city. She admitted her mistakes, her vulnerability, and the lessons she had learned. Her voice trembled at times, but her words were sincere. The council members exchanged glances, some nodding, others silent, weighing her honesty against the harm caused. Finally, an elder rose and addressed her. He spoke of wisdom, resilience, and the courage it took to face consequences. He reminded the villagers that everyone makes mistakes, but the measure of a person is how they respond. Nuru's actions in returning home, rebuilding her farm, caring for her children, and confronting the consequences of Taban's betrayal demonstrated the strength of her character. The council ruled that while she would need to repay what was owed in minor claims, the majority of the debts and accusations were dismissed. Nuru felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had faced the council and survived, not unscathed, but stronger. In the weeks that followed, life in the village settled into a new rhythm. The crops grew taller, the livestock flourished, and Nuru's children learned to take pride in their work alongside their mother. Neighbors who had been wary approached with gestures of support. The village slowly embraced her again, recognizing that mistakes could lead to wisdom and that courage often comes in returning home after a fall. Nuru herself began to feel a quiet peace, a sense of belonging that had been missing during her months of wandering. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, Nuru sat under the mango tree, watching her children laugh and play. She reflected on the journey she had undertaken. The city had offered excitement and illusion, but it had also brought betrayal and heartbreak. The village had been patient, even when she had left, and her family had endured the months without her guidance. She realized that the value of her life was not in chasing passion or novelty, but in cultivating love, responsibility, and resilience. Her mind wandered to Taban. She felt neither hatred nor longing, only the understanding that some people come into life to teach lessons through consequence. The danger and deception he brought had forced her to confront her desires and her responsibilities. It had shaken her, but it had not broken her. The wisdom she gained from that experience was now hers to carry forward. The village, once skeptical of her choices, began to look to her for guidance. Young women sought her advice on balancing freedom and responsibility. Children learned from her example that mistakes were not the end of a story, but the beginning of growth. Nuru found herself respected again, not for avoiding error, but for the courage to face life fully, with all its hardships and triumphs. Months later, during the harvest festival, Nuru stood at the center of the village. The sun cast a golden glow across the fields, and drums echoed in the distance. She watched her children dance with their friends, the villagers, celebrating the fruits of their labor. The elders approached and placed hands on her shoulders, acknowledging her resilience and the lessons she had passed on. For the first time in years, Nuru felt truly complete. She had chased freedom, faced betrayal, endured hardship, and returned home wiser. She understood now that life's true value lay not in the illusions of adventure, but in the strength, love, and dignity nurtured at home. As the festival continued into the night, Nuru looked toward the distant hills and whispered a prayer of gratitude. She had survived desire and deception, rebuilt what was broken, and reclaimed her place in the village. Her journey had been perilous, but it had taught her the most important lesson. Courage is not in running from life, but in returning to it, facing mistakes, and growing stronger. And as the firelight danced on her face, she felt a quiet smile. The past could not be undone, but the present and the future were hers to embrace. She had escaped, been deceived, faced judgment, and yet here she stood, whole, respected, and alive in a way she had never imagined. The village around her was alive, her children were thriving, and the legacy of resilience and courage she had earned would last far beyond her own lifetime. Nuru knew now that mistakes could bring wisdom, that risk could teach strength, and that redemption was possible at any age. The city had taken her for a moment, but the village had given her life back. The sun dipped below the horizon, the drums faded, and a calm descended over Kianjo. For Nuru, this was not an ending, but a beginning. Nuru, a 52-year-old widow from a quiet Ugandan village, has spent decades caring for her family and farm, quietly putting her own desires aside. When a charming younger man from the city tempts her with adventure and freedom, she leaves home in search of passion and excitement. The city, however, is harsher than she imagined. Betrayal, deception, and heartbreak follow, leaving her alone and struggling to face the consequences of her choices.